Picture this. On today's show, we're going to explore the variations between value and color, and also machine applique. Stay tuned. And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the Quilt Show. We're so glad you're watching us today, and welcome, audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. And you know, Alex, we now have people coming to the studio audience from far and wide. Today we have someone from Dubai in the audience, and I'm waving. Can you wave back? Hello, hello. And you know what we learned right before we started this show? We learned that there's a couple in the audience who are having their 40th wedding anniversary. And he said to her, he said, look, it's your 40th wedding anniversary. I will take you anywhere you want to go. And guess where she wanted to go? Right here. So you guys, happy anniversary. That's awesome. That's awesome.
It almost makes me cry a little bit. It's wonderful.
We encourage you, if you want to come to be a part of the studio audience, just stay involved with the newsletter, because we oftentimes say tickets are available.
Now.
They're free, but you got to call soon to get on the list.
Exactly.
So you've got something here at the top of the show that's really personal.
Yes, it is.
I think of it as being very personal. We have not officially said it in any of the episodes, but Alex is now a grandmother. Yes, absolutely. And the familiar name for you is now officially?
Bubby.
Bubby. Now, you're going to have to explain that a bit.
Yes, I am. My son, Joey, married Shelly, and Shelly was born in Israel. And Shelly came over in junior high. And one of my friends from the website, Ellen Gambrell, said, well, you have to be Bubby. And I go, I never heard of Bubby. And she said, most beloved grandma.
Yeah, isn't that great? But I also hear the second part of is that smells like chicken fat.
Yeah. And I can also gain weight. Nobody cares because I'm Bubby.
And it's funny because Alex now speaks in third person. Bubby says this. Bubby says do that.
Right. If it's something that Alex doesn't want to say, fourth person or whatever.
Absolutely. But, so that relates to today's project.
Yes. I've, of course, made quilts for my son and his wife and my daughter and her husband, but it was real crazy. When Shelly had her baby shower, I made receiving blankets, and she went nuts over them.
Now, receiving blanket is...
Yeah, he didn't know what that was.
Idiot like me.
When a baby is born, they say there should be a fourth trimester. And a receiving blanket is something that's about 40 inches square that you... It's like a straitjacket. You put the kid in, and they feel like they're back in the womb.
Okay.
So I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I made receiving blankets for my son, and in fact, even handed them off to them, too.
Now, do you think a quilt would be too warm for that?
A quilt is too bulky.
Too bulky?
Yeah.
So this is not quite a quilt.
Right.
It relates to quilt.
Right.
Okay.
So first let's talk about the fabrics that I used. When I was at market, I always want to see what Valerie Wells has up her sleeves. And she had this incredible elephant flannel. And it's hennaed.
Yeah, it looks like henna designs.
Mm-hmm. And right before Shelly and Joey got married, Shelly had her hand hennaed. So I thought this was perfect, and she loves animals. But Jean Wells, Valerie's mother, said, what you need to do is do flannel on one side, and then cotton, I want you to feel this, cotton.
Okay,
We know
this
flannel.
is flannel, flannel. Mm-hmm.
But cotton voile on the other side. Cotton voile is a luxurious cotton that feels like...
Oh, it feels like silk to me. And Justin's got some. He's going to pass out to the audience on the front row there. I want you guys just to feel this, because I really can be an idiot sometimes. I would have thought this was silk.
Really, and
Yeah.
a lot of the younger quilters are using this sort of cotton for garments and things like that.
Okay, you guys on the front row there, don't you agree?
Yes,
it is amazing.
It's beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful stuff. But what you have going on here is you've got the big tough guy with the flannel, and then you've got the little meek girl with the voile, and they don't really want to play together nicely. And I want to say that Valerie's fabric is through Free Spirit. So let's talk about first how I made the receiving blanket. It was very, very straightforward. You can whip them out. Oh, so I thought. So I thought. First thing you have to do, no questions asked. I don't care what side of the fence you stand on, you must pre-wash both of them. Okay? And then you iron it because they will react differently. And what I did, first trick is that you cut, let me get this out of the way, Ricky, thank you. You cut the backing or the voil much bigger, and then you pin, like there is no tomorrow, connecting the two. Okay? You then perhaps put on a walking foot, I don't know, or an even feed foot. I love that my 830 has an even feed foot.
Built in.
And then you start here, just here, you stitch all the way around. I think most people have made pillowcase type things. And then you stop here. Then I trim right up to that particular seam.
Okay, I'm looking. I want to, because I know it's white thread on white. You started here.
And ended here.
So there's a gap.
Yeah, a place to put your hand in. And then go ahead and trim. And then, of course, what you want to do is when you get to the corners so that it turns nicely right here, you just want to take off a little piece of, do not cut into the threads. And do that on all four corners. Once you've done that, then you just reach your hand inside, turn it inside out, and this takes a while, and poke the corners out so it's all nice and square and flat. I might even go to my ironing board
and press those
and press
edges.
it. Yeah, make it look really nice. And then, I'm not going to bother doing the whole thing once it's pressed, then just go and stitch 1/4 inch from the edge. That's what I did here.
Now let's look at that.
I love, Shelley didn't want to mail it back, but I love that it's been loved.
It has been loved.
Yeah. And the other thing that's kind of a side, before Lev, that is her name, it means heart in Hebrew. Before Lev, she also used it for sheets where she would just lay it on top of the mattress before she starts turning around and all that. So it was multi-purposed.
But there's a bigger story, or
There's
an
a big-
extra part to the
Right.
story, I should say.
So my son calls me up and he goes, Mom, do you want to make Shelley something really neat? Make her an adult size receiving blanket.
Now, who's ever heard of that? I've never heard of anything.
Right.
I've barely heard of the baby receiving blanket.
Right. And I'm like going, oh, the thought of pinning all that and not having them play together nicely and all that, and I kind of forgot about it.
But also, where they live.
They live in Los Angeles.
Okay, and that
so
matters because
it's hot down there. And so then she goes, Mom, you can really surprise her. Well, when I'm down in LA, she says, Bobby, I want an adult size receiving blanket. So I want to show you what I did. Justin, I want you to come in and help. Well, let me say the first challenge was I knew I wanted this elephant fabric, but I knew 42 inches wasn't wide enough, and I knew that it would be impossible to get the repeat correctly.
right.
Okay, so what I decided, okay, I'm gonna,
Is this the top? So,
yeah, we want them standing up.
Okay.
So it's just so easy. And I haven't given it to her yet. So what I did was I took this panel here and then I cut this piece in half and sewed it on each side. Now the caveat to the thing is, number one, I can't do it like the receiving blanket because it'll end up like one big giant duvet, like when you wash those and it comes out, you know, like this. So I took it to my long arm quilter, Diane Schweikert, and I said, just do big loopy quilting. Oh, and that almost killed her because she wanted to put batting in. And I said, no, do not put batting in. The second caveat was that she didn't want a binding on it. She wanted something as simple as what was done on Lev's blanket. So let me show you what I did.
Thank you, Justin.
Can you just take that off?
Bubby, will you make me one?
Yeah, Bubby.
Well, look at the edge. Let's look at the edge.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's fun to be a Bubby.
Oh, I'm scared of Bubby sometimes, I'll tell you. Okay, so there's the
Okay,
edge.
so what I did was, here's the edge. I simply brought the back over and folded it onto the front, and that way it was soft and wonderful. So let me show you a shortcut, or not a shortcut. Now it looks like I'm making doll blankets, so I guess I'm in the business of receiving blankets no matter how old you are. I went to my Bernina, and I just meandered all over it. Really big, really loose. probably, actually I need that ironing board.
Okay,
Let me put
and
this
it
on
is
here.
free motion.
Totally. Don't waste your time doing anything fancy.
And you can't see it on here, but let me do my finger, okay?
Sure.
It's like this kind of meander. It's nothing uber fancy because it's blending in with the flannel and actually going into that fabric.
Then you have to press it because it kind of gets weird. Then what I did was I trimmed it 2 inches on each side. Then I took and I folded it once, and I suppose you could do it in the opposite direction and do the flannel to the back if you wanted.
This nice little
I like
fine
the
fabric
softness
is
of
a
it,
nice
yeah.
little
And then,
less bulky edge treatment.
like this, I go all the way around. Of course, I'm not going to because we know what we're doing here. The trick is then when this comes around and this comes around, you don't want any funky thing hanging out on the corner. So what I did on this case was I went like this. I triangled that back. Okay, maybe a little spray starch might help if it's copying an attitude. Sorry, Ricky.
Okay.
And then put this down here. And then I pinned, just like before. Then I went to the sewing machine and just using my crazy little 1/4-inch foot, sewed along here using the inside guide of my 1/4-inch foot.
Just top stitching.
Yeah, exactly. On the inside, on the outside, and there you go.
Yay!
I know. Haven't gotten to clothes yet, but that's next.
That's okay. That's great. I'm sure Bubby will be making some clothes as Lev grows.
And Bubby says, you behave yourself.
Bubby is after all of us if we're not careful.
Right.
So Bubby, tell us what's coming up on the Quilt Show.
Well, you see the quilts behind us. They're simply magnificent. And coming up, you are going to learn a really cool way to approach applique. Stick around.
Welcome back, Alex. I have to say, even though I had never heard of a receiving blanket, I'd never even heard of an adult receiving blanket.
Because it didn't exist until right now.
So you're the one that made that up.
Right.
Today we've got wonderful quilts on the wall. They're art quilts, they're spectacular, they're portrait quilts, and we want to get into the mind of our artist today. So please welcome to the Quilt Show, Grace Errea. Grace, thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. We're glad you're here.
You know, it's such a joy to walk into the studio and see quilts like this hanging on the wall. I mean, they are spectacular.
So tell us a little bit about your quilting journey. When did it begin?
Well, it began actually about 30 years ago when I started making a quilt for at that time I was pregnant with my older daughter. And suffice it to say, at that time, I didn't even know anything about quilting. I didn't know about walking feet. I created a blanket that could only be hung on the wall because it was so heavy.
Ah, so you're keeping the walls warm.
Kept the walls warm. But I did give up the whole issue of quilting when my daughter was born because I was working full time. And of course, the kids and the family and taking care of them. I actually went back to quilting when, I would say about 10 years ago, maybe, somewhere along that line. And it's always been part of my desire, I suppose.
So sewing has been a part of it?
Sewing has always been a part of it. Sewing, it's been part of my life ever since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. There was at the time, my mom used to be a great seamstress. I had all of these wonderful little dresses, girl dresses when I was growing up. And I would actually make doll dresses to resemble the dress that my mom used to make.
How fun is that?
First by hand, and then of course Mom taught me how to use the sewing machine. So sewing, it's always been a part of my life. But I started truly quilting when my closet was totally full of suits. My kids, well, I was sewing for my kids. They were very young at that time. But one of those days when I handed one of my new dresses to my older daughter, and she said to me, "Mom, no more of that. Kmart is what everybody else is wearing.
Right.
So I had to turn my sewing into something else, and this is where I started, the usual traditional bed quilt. And
Well,
eventually.
as we discover more about you, I'd like to take a look at a couple of your quilts because
Well, because it's certainly not dressmaking, and it's really, really fun. So we're going to look at the first quilt, which is the lion. All right, tell us a little bit about this lion portrait.
The inspiration for the lion, and by the way, the name of that quilt is El Jefe. The inspiration was close to where I live. There's the San Diego Zoo. And I go there at least once a month for one reason and one reason only, photo shoot. At different time of the week or the month, you get different type of animals. So a few of those on the wall happen to be from the San Diego Zoo. The style of that quilt is more of what I try doing nowadays, which is the kind of imitation of watercolor impressionist type of quilting.
And the next quilt?
The next quilt is my Swan Lake. I would love to show you later on 3 other variations of it in different colors, but this one is, I went to, the inspiration of this one in particular was a swan that I saw on a lake in Vegas when I went to visit one of my friends in back of the Tropicana.
you would not know that looking at this
No, not at
picture
all.
on a quilt.
So yeah, so that's my Swan Lake, and it's a beautiful, beautiful swan.
The child.
The child, well, my older daughter's married now to a fella that, our son-in-law, he's great in terms of photography. When she was going out with him, they decided they were going to visit Africa and spend some time there. And I told Jay, you know, I know you're a great photographer, so better bring me a lot of pictures, otherwise don't even consider getting married to my daughter.
Very good.
So yes, he brought me a lot of pictures, and this is my favorite one from the trip in Africa.
It's beautiful. And the next one, I'm guessing not a kitty cat. A lynx?
No, it's not a kitty cat, it's a kitty cat.
Yeah.
It's a lynx,
Lynx.
again, San Diego Zoo. And again, I've tried to do that in the whole idea of value by using just one color in a monochromatic type of a manner.
And we're going to be talking about value of color
Yes,
today
we are.
a lot. So that's going to come up for everybody shortly. Now, the next piece, I believe you said this is an earlier piece. This was kind of...
Yeah, that's a very early piece when I was still trying to find myself, shall we say. So if you really look close to that piece, not only that it's got turned edge applique, but it's got raw edge applique. It's got three-dimensional applique where you use stuffed applique, and it's got yarn and you name it. It's still in that process where you try to find what is it that you want to say? How do you want to say it?
Grace, do you have somebody that you studied under, a mentor or such?
No. Sewing, like I said, it's always been my life, so that was not a problem. I took a lot of classes from different artists or quilt people, and then it kind of like I like to invent things. I like to push the envelope, and gee, I was told to do it this way. Let me try it that way and see what comes out of it.
And I think that's a great thing. And I have to say, we've been sitting here, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I haven't figured out your accent.
Oh, well, I was raised in Argentina. I was born in England, raised in Argentina, and we came to the United States with my parents when I was about 14, so the accent is still there. I do speak Polish because of my parents, although both of them are unfortunately deceased right now. So it's a combination of all of those languages,
wonderful.
Spanish and Polish.
Nice.
Well, it sure kept me in mystery for a while, so
Okay.
but I love it.
Now you know.
I really do love it. All right, now we're looking at the floral quilt here, closest to us.
That is, the inspiration of that one, believe it or not, was a calendar, a picture of one big Himalayan poppy. And what intrigued me more than just the flower itself is the color of the flower. I've never seen anything like that. So I just put together a 10, 20, however many flowers I had, and then I just organized them on the quilt. And it's called Poppies on Ice.
And the beading on this, is that
beautiful.
unusual for you?
Yeah, it is. I'm not much of a hand person. There's not enough time to do things by hand. So, as a matter of fact, the worst part of any quilt is when I have to go with the binding, because you have to do it.
Amen, sister.
I'm
So
there.
lately, if you notice, I've been doing these envelope things, which kind of relates to what you do with your receiving blanket. But that one, I had to try the beading because the spectacular part of the flower in that photograph that I saw was partially was that cobalt blue coloration. But then that center, that gold orange center, and I had to get it somehow to show off.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to do what you got to do, even if you don't really want to go there.
Right.
That's great. All right, we're looking at the last quilt that you're going to show us right now.
Very vibrant.
Thank you. Again, the inspiration on that one is San Onofre, a beach over in Southern California. And you know, usually people, when they go to the beach, they look at the water. They look at the waves. And I have a few quilts like that as well. But this time I decided to turn around and look at the cliffs behind me. And I took a couple of great snapshots. And one in particular I really adored because it had a lot of texture in it. In fact, the photo is in back of the quilt. And if you'd like to, I can show you that photo. But I just could not envision making a quilt with a little bit of blue sky, a lot of brown rock. So in order to show off, I started working in different colors, trying to just translate the light and the dark in that quilt into colors.
Right, and what you say here is basically it's the value that's
Precisely.
making the picture. The
Precisely.
color is changing, and you're going to teach us today how to not worry so much about the color, but spend more focus on the value. All right, and you even kind of hinted that there's different colors of swans that we might be able to see.
Yeah, there are.
Are they here?
They are here.
So we will. After the break, Alex is going to be with Grace over at the demo table, and we're going to learn a lot about value. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Grace, I'm very happy that you're here today to discuss value. I want to confess to the world that when I started quilting a million years ago, the teacher would say, sort your fabric by value, and I would sort it by color. And I didn't understand that had nothing to do with it. So when you made this quilt, how wise were you to light and dark?
Not at all. I knew light and dark, but I don't think I ever used that concept in that quilt. That quilt was strictly a gut feel quilt. Just, it looked good where I put whatever I put.
And then when you realized what you were doing, eventually you wrote this book with C&T Publishing, and it's called Impressionistic Applique, but it's also a study of color in here.
It is.
And tell us about your co-author.
Meredith is a good friend of mine, and she quilts a little bit, not very much, but I met her actually in a class of mine. She was a student, and she decided that it would be nice to teach this kind of, the whole idea of value. So I told her, I said, Meredith, I'm not very much up to writing, but she used to be a writer, so she volunteered to help me put some words together.
We love people like that. Okay, well, let's get down to business here with what you have.
Okay, well, like I said, this quilt, it was just something that I did by gut. It just felt good wherever I needed to put whatever I put. But then I retired from my real job, and I decided finally to take some art classes at the local community college.
Which I recommend strongly.
Oh, it is just an unbelievable experience. It changes your life, really. It really did to me. So one of the exercises that I had to do in my painting design class is the end result is this beautiful chart.
And this is the real deal, right?
That's the real deal. So the professor had us take white paint and black paint and make little dabs of each one of those to create these gray chips. At the end of this exercise, I had 700 chips. So then they had us cut the chips in 1 by 1 little squares, and he had us create an 8-value scale from those many, many chips, where the key is that every one of the values had to be somewhere smack in the middle, value-wise, to the next one. So it was quite an experience, quite a challenge to only use 8 chips out of 700.
And number 2 is missing in action. But I think you got the exercise down pat.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the values here, and then we'll get to the color wheel just quickly, okay?
Well, that chart over here kind of opened my eyes. I suddenly realized, oh my God, 8 values, this is what this whole quilt was about. So I created this 8-value scale out of real fabric in gray.
It's in the book,
and
right?
And the other colors. Yes, it is, page 33.
Okay, let me get there real fast. There we go.
And what I did is I created this 8-value scale only from the primary colors, blue, yellow, and red, and the secondary colors, which are the combination of those primary, which would be your violets, your oranges, and your greens. So that's what it is. I have the gray scale, which I mimicked from this.
Okay, right here, let's see, like, whoops, other way around, right?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
And then the other scales, what I did is I try to mimic every one of the values in the other hues. And by the way, value is one of the 3 elements of color. And it's amazing how when we say color, we really don't mean color.
What do you mean?
We mean hue.
Okay.
Right? Because color is composed of 3 elements, one of which is hue. Hue is the reds and the yellows and violet. Or when you say, hey, you got a nice green shirt, you're talking about hue. And we usually say this is color. It's hue. The second component of color is something that is called saturation, which tells you how strong that hue happens to be. Is it the pure color, pure red, which is like tomato red?
Right.
Something like that. And then you can desaturate all of those colors by adding something to it. So you're making less strong in the pure color and you're adding something to it to dilute it. So you can add gray, which is where you create all of your toned colors, the gray muddy colors. Or you can add white and black to the actual pure hue to create your 8-value scale, which is what we did here.
Okay.
All right. So I did something similar with fabric for the 8 values.
Right here. I think this is wonderful. Let me hold this up, okay?
Now that chart, what I actually did is after I decided on the 8 values of, in this case, the blue hue, I experimented on trying to prove that even though I put numbers on each one of those values, starting with 1 and going to 8, value has a lot to do with the neighborhood.
It's who it's playing with.
It's who is he playing with.
Right.
Because when you look at some of those chips that I put in the middle, this is value 5 of blue, and I cut out 8 exact value 8 little chips.
And then look at what happened going across here. Wrong way, right like that.
This was an unbelievable thing when I saw it. I said, oh my God, look at that. It looks so much darker here, so much lighter here, and yet it was exactly the same fabric. But using that gave me the idea of how do I work with focal point, which this quilt is an example of. How do I make focal points stand out against the background?
Okay.
And I found out that you need at least 3 value differential, as long as you're working on an 8-value scale.
So as long as you have that
You're
together, you're
starting
fine.
to see the focal point. Of course, the more value differential that you get, you see it much better.
Right.
So for example, in a quilt like this, you can almost do this flower, and I've had students do it in any color. They did it in red, they've done it in blue. As long as you keep dark values against this same light background, you're golden. The second example is exactly the opposite, where you're using the light values, but again, there's at least 3 value differential between the flower and the background.
Isn't there more than 3 right there?
Yeah,
That's
there
pretty
is
stark,
more.
right?
Minimum 3.
Okay.
Yeah, this is almost a value, what I would say value 8, and this is probably getting into the value 2
Right,
light tint.
right. These are just wonderful, by the way.
Thank you. Now, this quilt exemplifies something a little bit different. You can use value alone or in combination of other techniques to demonstrate the whole idea of perspective. Because when you really think about it, foreground is usually very, very dark, very saturated in effect. But as you're walking towards the background, you're going to find a lot of lighter tinted, more light valued areas.
I have never thought of that, but you say it, and yeah, no kidding. It would be the most saturated up front.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we
Here-
like him.
This is my eagle. And what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the whole idea of creating three-dimensionality against with value. When you're trying to build up and show this three-dimensional structure here, the light is shining on his beak, and therefore this is going to be the lightest part. And then it starts getting darker and darker as you move away from it.
I want to point out, too, here, I don't think I've seen an eagle with all these different hues in it, right?
No.
Yeah, I'm saying the right word, right? Not
Yes.
color. Yeah, okay. And that just goes to show how important the value is. Okay.
Now this is an example of using, creating patterns where you can use any hue that you want. This melodic swan, and I call them melodic, I'll tell you in a minute why, started with my swan lake.
Right, and you spoke about this in the last segment.
Right. So this is basically just the face or the front end of that swan lake. This one is done in blue,
Put this
and
next.
there is the red.
Here, put it on that side.
Okay,
There,
and
look at
there
that.
is my green. So this one, I call it my tamale tango. This one, I call it my meadow waltz, and this is my moonlight serenade. It started with this one.
But if, say you don't like blue and you love green, go for it.
And I've had students doing it in orange or in purple or whatever. The whole key here, Alex, is that if you have a shape that you designed in your pattern, and you decide that this is a value 1 shape, let's say very, very light, the key here is to find exactly the same value in the different hues.
And do you... I'm sorry. Go
And
ahead.
that's where that chart comes in very handy.
And do you go by your photograph to identify those things?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I usually work from photographs, or I sketch by doing lights and darks on the sketch.
Okay.
The final thing that I'd like to demonstrate here with value is that you actually can create mood with using value. So this is one of my signature quilts. It's a popsicle sunset. And if you notice, other than a few exceptions here and there, the primary amount of values that are here are the dark ones, the shades, the purples and the dark reds and the bright oranges. So this creates a sunset type of a mood. Same pattern, exactly. But then if you go into the tints instead of the shades, meaning the first few values on that table, let's say value 1, 2, and 3, you create more of the mood of dawn, early dawn. So this is called my popsicle dawn.
I think this is absolutely fascinating. You're saying it right. And if at home you're like going, go back and watch this again, because this is information that I paid money for in college. I mean, seriously, you know? And we thought it might be fun during break to pull up a couple people in the audience. We polled and we said, are there any of you that have, you know, want to learn about value? And some hands came up, which is buy her book, right? And we're going to play with these during break. And when we come back, it might be interesting to learn what surprised people about it and the whole thing. Because you
Sounds
do,
great.
and you do teach classes on this all over, right?
All over.
One-day
all over.
classes.
The value is a one-day class.
Excellent, excellent. So when we come back, we'll see how the audience members did, and we're going to delve into applique next. Stick around.
On the next quilt show, framing and borders and texture. Oh my.
We welcome you to the wonderful world of Wendy Butler Burns.
And so here's just one example where I had an asymmetrical border where it's only on two sides, and even times I can have the border width be different sizes.
Plus, our TQS cameras catch up with Sue Spargo to see what she's been up to.
And better yet, if she'll teach us some dimensional eye-catching stitches.
I bet she will. On the next quilt show. Welcome back. Well, during the break, we saw that we have some audience members that have been playing with this experiment a little bit. I want them to introduce themselves to you real quick.
I'm Jan. Cheryl.
Sue?
Rita.
All right, you guys, how was it?
It was fun.
It was a little bit tricky, but it was challenging, yes.
It was challenging. Okay, we have the purple team and the green team. So, so I'm going to have the purple team talk because you two guys work together, all right?
Yes.
I'm going to say, you two ladies, okay, and get out of my guy talk.
The hardest thing is to not go by color family. You know, we're trained more or less to do that. So we have to kind of squint and then find the darker through the squint.
Okay, do you think you did a great job here?
We're probably 80% maybe.
80%. If you could change anything right now, what would you change?
Well, we're still trying to figure out where this piece goes.
All right,
That's a little unusual.
let's ask the expert.
That one goes well where it is. It is about a 3.
Congratulations. All right, and let me have your comments. What do you think?
I found myself second guessing a lot of times, and it was the relationships between one another changed as you'd put things together, and it was the interaction of different pieces together, and so I kept thinking, oh well, this is different with this, and then this is different with this, and just going up and down. And
But I bet nobody had a problem with number 1 and number 8.
That's where we started.
I mean, as far as you didn't put it, you didn't do that.
no,
You didn't get that one down there.
No,
That's for
no.
sure. All right. So good job. All right. So Alex,
Okay.
I'm going to let you take the green team.
Now with the green team, what surprised you?
It was really challenging when we had prints that had different colors in them, like this one has 2 shades of green plus a black. Where did we put it? We couldn't tell.
And I'll have you comment in a moment, okay?
And with this one in particular, we thought it was too light for there and too dark for there, so we stuck it in the middle.
So what do you say here?
Well, actually, something like this, you do have to squint. When you're squinting, you're actually getting rid of a lot of the area in your eye, and it does help you locate the values. And I would definitely put this one here. To me, it belongs here. It doesn't belong here. One thing that I would like to comment is something that is beneficial, hopefully, to all of us. Notice we have this guy over here, but it was laying over here with the back. You know, you guys, when you buy fabric, you buy the front and the back of the fabric. Suppose you don't have a value 1 in your stash. Well, always look at the back of your fabrics too, and it could be
turn
either
it
a
over.
value 1 here or a value 3
Right.
there.
That's great. And one thing that I was here watching all this is that both teams, when they started, they kind of had this, here's my lights, they're kind of trickling down towards the bottom of the dark. And then I kept saying, you got to get 8 piles. And so then that was whenever y'all started panicking a little bit, because you could see the shift here, but to really put it in a number was what really
Well, this is
caused
an
the
all-day
problem.
class, and I recommend for you to take this if you're in the area. You guys did great. Time to get to applique.
Let's hear it for the teams. Good job. Good job. All right, so Grace, me and you, we're going to go over and we're going to work on applique, okay?
Okay.
During the break, while they were working on those color swatches, you were showing me your applique technique. And I really think this is revolutionary because you're doing some things I've never seen. You're doing a few things that I have seen, but I want you to start by showing us the simple part first, okay?
Okay, 3-piece applique. Here's a leaf. like everything else, I start with an inspiration. To me, this is my inspiration. And what I did is I drew a picture of this leaf. So it's basically 3 parts to it. There is this side, there is that side, and then there is the stem. The next thing I usually do is I go ahead and I enlarge this particular inspiration. So in this case, I just enlarge it by 120%. Sometimes it's more than that.
And I'm going to flip that around just so that
Oh,
we can
yeah.
see
Yeah.
the numbers. Has been 120%, and this one's a little bit
Right.
smaller. Okay?
All right. So, and I do this with all of my pieces. We'll be seeing some other ones later on. So that's my first step. My second step is I take this drawn piece of my quilt to be, and I draw on a vinyl, whether it is a piece like that or whether it is vinyl that I get at Lowe's or Home Depot or a painter's vinyl.
This small one is more like an overhead projector.
That's what it is.
And this
yeah.
one is something that you could get at the home store.
Right.
Yeah.
So I redraw this on the vinyl with an indelible Sharpie pen, and I do exactly everything. I go over to the outline, I do the middle lines, and I assign each shape a number.
Okay.
Each shape has to have a number so that I can locate them later on, and you'll see as we start building this.
And is this number a sequential to the applique, or is it just a reference number?
Just a reference number.
Okay.
I usually, in a bigger piece, I try to keep them all kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
together.
So you're not
otherwise-
searching for numbers. I get it.
Exactly. All right, so once I have this, and this vinyl, whether this vinyl or this vinyl, is going to be, in effect, used twice. Once it's going to be used to create my freezer paper patterns.
Okay.
Since I always work from the back of the fabric, I literally have to reverse it, and I create my freezer paper pattern from it in reverse.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
one of the things I like about freezer paper, of course, we use it in many ways, but it's somewhat translucent, so you can see through
That's
to do your
right.
tracing.
If you work on a white surface, you can very easily see the lines from the vinyl. If you can't see it too well, then there are those light tables,
boxes, yes.
which is wonderful. So in effect, what you're seeing here is you're seeing the outline of the shape. I also put the numbers of the shapes, although I didn't write them backwards. I just
Right.
wrote them in normal way.
That's good.
And the other thing that I do at this point in time in my applique is that, like in any other applique, you can't put 2 pieces of fabric together because they're not going to stay together. So you have to choose one of them to be under the other one.
Right.
And the way I denote that is by a line like this. So in effect, what I am saying here in this picture is
And-
that shape number 2 is eventually going to have a seam allowance. I call those underes.
Okay, but it's the green line we're looking at there.
Correct.
All right.
That's the green line. Okay. So there is my freezer paper template. And then what I go ahead and do is I use the second use of this vinyl is later on when I literally start building my quilt, I use it to position on, in this case, over my background.
Now, what are we using here?
This is a foam, insulation board.
Oh, yes.
And it's used because of the glue element, and it's nice to have a thick thing that I can go ahead and put the shapes later on, as you will see, and then just pin them into the board so I don't have to worry too much about pinning this way or pinning that way.
Okay.
You'll see it in a moment. So I put this like that, and that's eventually going to become my locator of the shapes. And one of them is already there, so let me just position it correctly.
All right.
Okay, so let me put this away for a little bit.
Okay, I just want to say the one that she's talking about was the little green one that's already been positioned there.
Right.
So that's how you get your pattern, and that's how you begin.
Right.
Now we're going to come back to this, right?
We're going to come back to it.
But we're going to look at a little more complicated version because I just think about everybody that's watching this is going to want to take their pictures and start doing something. So,
There you go.
So we're looking at the tiger.
And this was a much smaller picture. What I did is I drew the picture on a piece of paper, and if you notice, I have a copier at home that does posterizes.
Okay.
So I did it as a 4-page
Okay.
poster, and I glued them together. So this is my final picture that I'm trying to make a quilt out of it. So the second step would be to put the vinyl and to do a copy of the vinyl, and we have it backwards.
Oh,
if I
okay,
may.
thank you. Yep.
So again, with indelible pen, I will copy, trace all of the lines and all of the shapes.
And where we're at this stage is this is the reverse drawing already. You've already...
No. This is the real drawing.
This is the real drawing.
This is the real drawing. This is what this particular
This is the one that's going to go
be.
upside down.
That's the one that's going to go upside down. Notice, though, that before I did this in a more complex one, I also put all of the shape numbers in every one of the shapes. And looking at my original picture, which unfortunately I don't have it with me, I also put values attached to each shape. So this is shape 41, value 4. This is shape 22, value 2. The value is a more or less thing. It can change when I build the picture.
Right.
Or the quilt.
If you put down a value 5 and suddenly you're looking at it and go, I think it needs to be darker, you'll go to value 6.
6 or 7, or
and
whatever.
That's good. So
Whatever
it's
is
a little
needed.
bit organic.
So then what I did eventually is I inverted it backwards now, and I overlaid it with the freezer paper as I did the leaf before, and I just traced everything again.
And you know, it looks really, really complicated, and there's a lot of pieces in there, but there's not thousands of pieces in here. This is not as complicated as it looks.
That's true.
Great. All right.
And if it gets complicated, the way I work, one piece at a time.
That's right. I heard inch by inch, anything's a cinch, and yard by yard, everything's hard.
I
Did you
agree
know
with
that?
that. I agree with that.
All right, so now let's
Okay.
go back to the leaf and see how
So
the applicator,
let's go back
because
to the
this
leaf.
is where it gets extremely revolutionary. This is
So-
technique I've never seen before.
So here's my freezer paper, right? So here's a copy of the freezer paper where I literally cut out those two shapes out of the freezer paper, and I pressed them to the back of my fabric. Again, I always work on the back, and especially in this case because I will be applying this particular product and I don't want it to be seen on the front. So I have to know what the shape is on the back of the fabric. So then what I do is I take one of these drawing Prismacolor pencils, the one that it will show well, and I will literally trace that whole shape. Now what I do is if the shape is, everything is ovaries,
Oh yes, because you said a while ago you've got things that go under, and those are underees.
Right.
So the things that are over.
It's ovaries. So what I do is, since this is all around, there is no underees in this one, I just drew the shape all around. And then when I take this off, I will literally put the shape number inside.
Okay, so you'll remember.
So I remember. This one does have an underee over here, and when I take the shape off, the freezer paper off, I need to know which one is the shape. Is it this or is it this?
That's true, because I can see that could be too
It could be confusing, right?
Yes.
So I make sure that before too much time goes, I will put that number inside of what I know it's going to be the shape.
Okay. Yes, I get that. Wow.
Okay. At
Those
this
are
point,
good tips.
At this point, here's the result without the freezer paper. And I know that this is not very easy to see because it's a dark fabric, but this is a little easier.
But you did choose a fairly bright orange, and
Yes.
from here we can see how to cut that out.
Right.
It works.
But the next step is literally to use this product. It's a
Okay.
heat fuse glue.
Okay, hand me those 2 bottles, because you say you're still in a little bit of an experimental mode.
It's still experimental. I'm trying to find more than one, and I have these 2 that I've already tried, and they work exactly the same. And then I have 2 others in the house that I haven't experimented with yet.
Okay, and this one's liquid thread, and this one is called heat set glue, all right?
What I like about this process, Rick, is that if you use, it's fusing, basically. But if you use the Steam-A-Seam 2 for fusing, you're basically covering the whole piece with that Steam-A-Seam, and your fabric becomes very stiff, especially if you start putting 2 or 3 shapes, one on top of the other. Now you could use regular glue, which a lot of quilt artists do also, just regular fabric glue, and you go ahead and you put it in the back. But the glue, when it dries, it glues. So if you decide that you don't like something and you want to change it, you don't have that flexibility. You literally have to rip the piece apart.
Right.
This is a little different. What
Now,
I
you've
do,
diluted this.
I dilute this 40% water, 60% of
Of the
the
glue,
actual
yeah.
product. And what I do is I literally just go around. Talk about having
Yeah,
pressure here.
That's okay, you're doing
All right,
fine.
so I just kind of go around here.
And you're staying
cetera.
right on the line.
Yeah, kind of on the line.
And using a brush.
And then with the brush, I kind of brush it so that some of it goes on the inside, but most of it gets brushed out onto the outside. And how do I know in and out?
Because you
Well,
got your number. Yeah. See, I'm listening.
You're a good student.
Thank you. You're
So
a good
anyway,
teacher.
I go ahead and do this all around, and then usually I work like in a chain of 10, 20 pieces.
Okay, now that's got to dry for about 15 minutes, you say?
At most, 15 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
And when it dries, you know it's dry because it doesn't have that wet look. It's got a very solid, powdery look.
Okay.
So then I take that powdery look, and using this sheet, I literally go ahead and press this, and it's this one you can see also. I press it with a pretty hot iron. And I know it's ready when you look at this, and it's kind of not that
It's starting to
powdery-
become opaque. It's
It's
starting to
starting
get
to
it dark.
become kind of vinyl-y.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is one of those Teflon pressing sheets, just in
Correct.
case you didn't know what that was.
Correct. It's a.
So this protects your iron.
It protects the iron. Otherwise, this would glue to the iron.
Okay.
All
All right.
right.
So now then, just let's
once
move
I
on
have
to
that-
putting those guys on here.
Then I cut out on the line,
Right.
And then I go ahead and use the second use of this vinyl is basically to go ahead and position my pieces. So this, by the way, is the best tool I've ever found. It's a long handled tweezers, and they help me position. See, this is how I do it.
Right.
And once I see that it's in reasonably good position, the way I keep it there is I go under with a pin and I go right into this.
Okay. That holds it in place.
And that's what I like about this,
Yes,
because I
that
can
makes
just
sense.
pin right in. Okay, so then we'll notice that this has a seam allowance that is sticking out, so it's going to be covered by this piece.
And once that's there, you can take the plastic off. You can use the hot iron, press it,
Bingo.
and it's there.
Once I like where it is, I go ahead and take the iron, press it. Maybe 10 seconds,
Right.
just enough.
Because it's basically, it's not glued. That was a fusible type product that you actually painted on just along the edge so that it could
Exactly.
stay there. Now let's look at these tigers again. Here's, when we saw the pattern, take a look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Ah, but that's not the end.
Well, there again, talking about value, right?
I love, this is my favorite part right now, because I love seeing all these different versions of one pattern.
Of one pattern.
That's great. And one last little tidbit is that instead of putting it on your background,
Like the leaf
you
of that.
could build your entire applique separately
Correct.
and put it on a background.
And then build your background on its own.
And then here we have your finished iris. What do you think about that? Absolutely. Thank you. That's awesome. Alex, come on in and see the beautiful work.
I have not seen that either. Wait, the way you're, hello.
What I wanted to say, it feels like Christmas around here, not only with the teaching, but what we're about to give away. You've got Reynolds freezer paper coming at you today.
We love that.
We've got some warm and natural batting coming your way today.
My favorite.
We have got some, tell us about your Schmetz needles. You love Schmetz?
I love Schmetz, and I usually buy the 70 size tapestry, or top stitch, I'm sorry. I always
Top stitch?
confuse those two.
Yeah.
Top stitch, because it's got a nice big hole in the needle, and it's easy to thread.
And you have some greeting cards.
I have some
Blank note
complimentary
cards.
greeting cards.
Those will be for you as well.
That was fascinating.
Good.
I think I might just try it.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think,
Oh,
mister?
I think it's been great. Thank you so much for sharing
You're very
everything with us
welcome.
today. I know that's a lot of information, and it was wonderful education for everybody at home. So we can take a breath,
Yes, we can. We've gone through a lot today.
and we can say
It's a new day.
every day.
Remember, stay tuned for the after set. Grace, earlier on in the show, you mentioned that you had another career before this career. Tell us about that.
Well, that's the career that you sometimes have to have when you decide to get married or have kids and you have to send them to school. So yes.
The college career.
The college career. I worked for IBM for about 30 years. I started as a programmer and I did some teaching there too.
No wonder she's so smart.
Oh, no, I'm not smart. And then I became an executive of IBM and I just climbed up the ranks and I managed different organizations. I started in New York and finally about 12 years ago, IBM transferred me to California, which is something that my husband always wanted to move. And that's basically it. I picked up the Boeing account when I was in California.
Nice.
So we had a big group of people that managed that account. And then there was a certain point in time when my older daughter was about ready to get married. My younger one graduated from college, and I said, time to retire.
You know, Joan Wolfram calls putting your kids through college self-inflicted poverty.
Yeah.
No doubt about
I
that.
can understand that.
Well, I can imagine as that executive, you were a very, very busy person.
I was very busy, yeah.
And
Especially
now,
when children.
you must have this wonderful life of freedom and just comfort.
You know, it's interesting because I used to be an executive and a mom. Now I teach, I write a book, I quilt, and I travel all around with my quilting. I literally cannot leave the house without my calendar because it's loaded with stuff that I need to do from one day to the other one, which is not necessarily what it used to be.
You're busy.
Yeah, I'm
Very
very
busy.
busy and I love it. It's exactly what I always wanted to do.
What about exercise?
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I make it a point to run fast walk. Forget about running. Fast walk, about 3 to 4 miles, at least 5 to 6 days a week. Sometimes 7, depends on the weather and how busy I am and where I am. Obviously, today I didn't, so tomorrow
well.
I may just do double.
I need some of whatever it is that you're taking, because I could use some energy. You're great, wonderful today.
Thank you. Thank
Great
you.
fun and super valuable information. I mean, really, both segments were like full classes in themselves. So,
Well, yes. Basically, that's how I teach, because I usually teach either the value class, which takes a whole day. I also teach people how to take a pattern that I've created and learn the technique that you and I worked on, Ricky. And then there is the other class I teach, which is a little longer, where, you know, there's a lot of people who, they don't want to do somebody else's pattern.
right.
Give me a technique, and I want to create my own pattern from my own inspirational photographs. So I do a lot of that too, where I teach people how to take a photo, create the patterns that you saw me create, and then with the technique, create a quilt.
That's great.
Great.
Well, no doubt you're going to be teaching a little bit more after today.
That's fine.
That's
I love
great.
it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's not only an honor, but it's also a pleasure.
Thank you.